Stop right there. Before you scroll past this, let me tell you something that's going to completely change how you see your job, your boss, and every single person in your workplace. Right now, at this exact moment, someone in your company is doing less work than you. They show up late, they take long lunches, they disappear during crunch time, yet somehow they're untouchable. Layoffs come and go, budget cuts happen, teams get restructured, but this person, they never get the axe. Meanwhile, you're grinding, you're staying late, you're hitting every deadline, you're the one people count on, and you know what? You're one bad quarter away from being shown the door. How does that make sense? It doesn't. Not until you understand what I'm about to show you. See, the game you think you're playing isn't the game that's actually happening. You think work is about working hard, about being good at your job, about being reliable and competent, and that's exactly what they want you to think. Because as long as you believe that lie, you stay replaceable. But the people who never get fired, they cracked a code that nobody talks about. They understood something dark, something ruthless, something that Machiavelli figured out 500 years ago when he was watching princes rise and fall. Performance doesn't create security, perception does. Let me say that again because it's going to sting. Your actual work matters less than what people believe about your work. The meeting you saved matters less than who saw you save it. The problem you solved matters less than how many people know you're the problem solver. This is the truth that separates the disposable from the indispensable, and today you're going to learn exactly how to cross that line. You're going to discover the 7 psychological laws that make you impossible to fire. Not through politics, not through manipulation, through strategic positioning that makes removing you more painful than keeping you. These aren't feel-good corporate tips. This is dark workplace psychology that actually works. And if you've ever felt that sick feeling in your stomach when layoff rumors start, if you've ever watched someone less talented get promoted while you got passed over, if you've ever wondered why your effort doesn't translate to security, then pay attention. Because after this video, you'll never see your workplace the same way again. Before we start, I want you to do something right now. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I am destroy the illusions that have been keeping you vulnerable, shape you a lie to your entire career. From your first job interview to your last performance review, they fed you the same comfortable fiction. Work hard, be reliable, stay humble, keep your head down, do good work and good things will happen. Beautiful story, complete trap. Here's what they never told you. Companies don't value hard workers. They value hard to replace workers. There's a massive difference. One is about effort, the other is about leverage. Think about the people in your office right now. Really picture them. You know exactly who does the real work and who coasts. You know who carries the team and who hides behind group projects. You know who's competent and who talks a good game. Now ask yourself this. When cuts come, does your company fire the coasters and keep the grinders? Not always. Sometimes not even usually. Because your boss isn't sitting there with a spreadsheet of who works hardest. Your boss is sitting there thinking, who can I afford to lose? Who would cause the least disruption? Who would be easiest to replace? And here's the brutal truth. If you're just a hard worker, you're easy to replace. Someone younger will do it for less money. Someone hungrier will work longer hours. Someone more desperate will take worse conditions. Hard work is a commodity. But strategic irreplaceability, that's power. Machiavelli once said, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." He understood that reality matters less than perception. The prince who appeared strong survived. The prince who was actually strong but appeared weak got destroyed. Your workplace runs on the same dark logic. It doesn't matter if you're the best at your job. It matters if key people believe removing you would hurt them personally. See, companies make decisions based on pain avoidance. They don't fire people who would cause them massive headaches if they left. They fire people whose absence would barely register. They fire people who are, despite all their effort and dedication, functionally invisible. So the real question isn't how hard are you working? The real question is how much pain would your absence cause? If the answer is not much, you're in danger. If the answer is we'd be scrambling for months, you're protected. This isn't about being manipulative. This isn't about playing games. This is about understanding the psychological architecture of job security and building yourself into it strategically. Most people spend their entire careers focused on doing their job well. That's table stakes. That gets you nothing but continued employment until something changes. Budget cuts, new management, corporate restructuring, market downturn. Then your good work becomes irrelevant because you never built the thing that actually protects you: strategic irreplaceability. Here's how the system actually works, not how HR says it works. Every person in your company exists in someone's mental map. Some people are labelled critical, some are labelled useful, some are labelled replaceable, and most people have no idea which category they're in until it's too late. The people who never get fired, they made damn sure they're in the critical category in the minds of the people who matter, not through performance reviews, through psychological positioning, and that's what the next 7 laws are about. These aren't theories, these aren't platitudes. These are the actual mechanisms that separate people who survive every corporate storm from people who get swept away, despite being good at their jobs. You ready? Because once you see this, you can't unsee it, and you'll start noticing exactly who in your company understands these laws and who's flying blind. Let's start with the first law, and this one's going to challenge everything you think you know about being valuable. Shape Law 1. Own the invisible infrastructure. Listen carefully, because this is where most people lose the game before they even know they're playing. You think your job is what's in your job description. Write code, manage accounts, handle logistics, process data. Whatever your title says, that's what you think you're paid for. Wrong. Your actual value isn't in what you do. It's in what stops working when you're gone. There's a massive difference. One is about tasks, the other is about systems. Think about your workplace right now, not your tasks, the actual infrastructure that keeps things running. I'm talking about the invisible systems, the relationships that make projects move. The knowledge that exists in someone's head but nowhere else. The processes that aren't documented. The connections between departments that only function because one person makes them function. That's the real architecture of any company. And most of it is invisible. It's not in any manual. It's not in any database. It's held together by specific people who understand how things actually work versus how they're supposed to work. Here's the dark truth. Companies can replace your tasks easily. They can't replace your infrastructure easily. Someone can learn your job in 3 months. But rebuilding the invisible systems you maintain, that takes years, maybe never happens. So the question is simple. Are you just doing tasks, or are you maintaining infrastructure? Most people focus entirely on their deliverables. They hit deadlines. They complete projects. They check boxes, and they think that's job security. It's not. That's just baseline performance that keeps you employed day to day. But the person who becomes the central node in multiple systems, that person becomes expensive to remove, not because they're talented, because removing them would break things in ways that aren't immediately obvious until it's too late. Let me give you an example. There's always someone in every company who just knows how to get things approved. They're not high-ranking, they don't have impressive titles, but somehow when you need something pushed through, they know exactly which person to email, which meeting to join, which phrase to use. They've mapped the invisible power structure. That person is untouchable. Because firing them doesn't just remove one employee. It removes the lubrication that keeps the machinery running. Or think about the person who's been around long enough to know where all the bodies are buried. Not gossip, actual institutional knowledge. Why that project failed. Which vendor screwed up. What happened last time someone tried this strategy? That person carries the company's memory in their head. Losing them isn't just losing an employee, it's losing continuity. It's risking repeated mistakes. It's starting from zero on problems that were already solved once. Machiavelli once said, "Never was anything great achieved without danger." And here's the dangerous truth about owning infrastructure. You have to deliberately make yourself central to systems that matter. Not in an obvious way, not by hoarding information like a villain, but by genuinely becoming the person who holds pieces together. How do you do this? You start by mapping what actually matters in your company versus what people say matters. Forget the org chart, forget official processes, watch what actually happens. Where do decisions really get made? Who do people actually go to when they need something done? What breaks when someone's on vacation? Then you position yourself in those gaps. You become the person who connects the dots. You become the person who understands both the technical side and the business side. You become the person who can translate between departments. You become the person who knows which rules can bend and which can't. This isn't about taking on more work. This is about taking on strategic work, work that makes you a keystone. Remove a regular brick from a wall and nothing happens. Remove a keystone and the whole structure shifts. Here's what this looks like practically. You start attending meetings adjacent to your role, not to speak, to understand. You start building relationships with people 2 levels above and 2 levels below you, not for politics, for mapping. You start documenting the undocumented, not in reports nobody reads, in your head, in your network. You become the person people come to for context, for history, for connections, for understanding how to navigate the company's real systems versus its stated systems. And here's the beautiful part. Nobody can fire this person without massive pain. Because they're not just firing a role, they're firing institutional knowledge, relationship networks, and system understanding that took years to build. The people who survive every layoff, they're not always the top performers. They're the people who are woven into too many systems to extract cleanly. You think you're being a team player by just doing your job well. That's exactly what keeps you replaceable. The team player who also holds the architecture together, that's the person who never has to worry about their job disappearing. So starting today, ask yourself, what infrastructure am I building? What would break if I left? Not what tasks would need reassignment. What actual systems would stop functioning? If the answer is not much, you have work to do. Not harder work, smarter positioning. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I build what can't be replaced. But here's where it gets even more ruthless. Owning infrastructure is just the foundation. The second law is about something even more powerful, something that operates entirely in the psychological realm. Shape law. 2. Control the narrative. Now we're getting into the part that makes people uncomfortable. But if you want real security, you need to hear this. Your boss doesn't actually know what you do. Read that again. Your boss has a vague idea. They know your title. They know your general area. But the day-to-day reality of your work, they're guessing, they're trusting, they're assuming. And here's the dark part. They're not evaluating you based on what you actually do. They're evaluating you based on the story they tell themselves about what you do. That story, you need to control it. Most people think their work speaks for itself. They believe if they do good work, it'll be recognized. If they solve problems, people will notice. If they deliver results, they'll get credit. That's not how human psychology works. People don't see reality. They see their interpretation of reality. And interpretations are shaped by whoever controls the narrative. Think about this. Two people do the exact same quality work. One sends a quick email highlighting the win, the other stays quiet. 6 months later, who does the boss remember? Who gets mentioned when promotion discussions happen? Not the person who did the work, the person who shaped the story around the work. This makes people angry because it feels manipulative. But it's not manipulation, it's strategic communication. It's understanding that in a company of hundreds or thousands of people, visibility is a skill, not an accident. Machiavelli once said, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see and few can feel. Everyone sees what you show them. Few actually understand what you did. So if you don't show strategically, you become invisible regardless of your impact." Here's what controlling the narrative actually means. It means you shape how your work is understood, remembered, and discussed. Not through lying, through strategic framing. When you complete a project, you don't just mark it done. You craft the summary that explains what was accomplished, why it mattered, and what it enables. You send it to the right people. You present it in terms they care about. When you solve a problem, you don't just fix it quietly. You highlight what would have happened if the problem hadn't been solved. You make the invisible visible. When you contribute to a team effort, you make sure your specific contribution is understood. Not by taking credit away from others, by making sure your piece isn't lost in, "the team did great work." This isn't about ego. This is about survival. Because when budget cuts come, your boss isn't looking at objective productivity metrics. They're thinking, who would I miss? Who's been driving value? Who's been solving problems? And their answers come from the stories in their head, stories that you either shaped or left to chance. The people who control their narrative don't wait for performance reviews to make their impact clear. They create a continuous stream of strategic visibility. Not spam, not self-promotion that annoys people. Strategic data points that reinforce their value. Here's a brutal example. Company goes through layoffs. Two people do similar work at similar quality. One has been strategically visible, regularly shares wins, shows up in leadership meetings occasionally, gets mentioned in updates. The other is quiet, does great work but doesn't broadcast it. Who gets cut? Usually the invisible one. Not because they're worse, because when forced to choose, people keep who they remember, and memory is shaped by narrative. Think about the last time you heard about a successful project at your company. Did you learn about every person who contributed? No. You learned about the people who were part of the story that got told. The others, they existed in the background of someone else's narrative. You cannot afford to exist in the background of someone else's narrative. You need to be the author of your own story within the company. Now here's where most people screw this up. They think controlling the narrative means sending annoying self-promotional emails. It doesn't. That actually hurts you. People see through desperation. Real narrative control is subtle. It's strategic. It's giving people the information they need to understand your value without feeling like you're bragging. It's saying, finish the Q3 analysis, identified 200K in cost savings we can implement next quarter, instead of finish the analysis. Same work, different narrative. It's showing up to the right meetings not to talk, but to be present when decisions are made. So you're part of the story that gets told later. It's building relationships with people who influence perception, not to manipulate them. To ensure they have accurate information about your contributions when your name comes up. It's documenting your impact in ways that make it easy for others to understand and remember. Not lengthy reports, quick, clear communications that busy people can absorb in 30 seconds. Machiavelli understood that princes who controlled their reputation survived. Princes who didn't, regardless of their actual abilities, got overthrown. Your workplace is the same. Control how you're perceived or accept that others will control it for you. And here's the uncomfortable reality. The people who don't control their narrative, they often get shocked when they're let go. But I did such good work. Yeah, work nobody remembered because you didn't make it memorable. Your value exists in two places, reality and perception. You need both. But if you only focus on reality, you're playing half the game. The people who focus on both, they're the ones who stay employed when everyone else is getting cut. So ask yourself right now, what story does your boss tell themselves about you? When your name comes up in leadership meetings, what do people say? If you don't know, you're in danger. If you know, and it's not what you want, you need to start shaping it differently. This isn't about being fake. This is about making sure your real contributions are actually seen, understood, and remembered by the people who make decisions about your future. Drop this affirmation in the comments. My value is visible. But narrative control only works if you understand the third law. And this one's about reading power dynamics most people completely miss. Shape Law 3. Map the real power structure. Your company has two organizational structures, the one on paper and the one that actually exists. Most people only see the first one, the org chart, the titles, the official reporting lines. They think power flows according to the hierarchy. They think decisions get made in the meetings on the calendar. That's not how it works. That's the theatre. The real show happens somewhere else entirely. Every company has a shadow power structure, informal, unwritten, invisible to people who aren't paying attention, and the people who understand this structure have a massive advantage over those who don't. Think about this. Who actually makes decisions in your company? Not who's supposed to make them, who actually does. Often it's not the person with the fancy title. It's the person that fancy title trusts, the advisor, the confidant, the person they check with before making calls, or think about whose opinion actually matters. When someone senior is forming a view on something, whose input do they seek? Not officially, actually. There's always someone, sometimes multiple someones. Those are the real power nodes, the people who never get fired. They've mapped this structure completely. They know who actually influences what. They know which relationships matter. They know where real decisions get made versus where they get announced. Machiavelli spent his entire career watching power operate behind the scenes. He knew the court positions that mattered weren't always the most visible ones. He understood that proximity to power is often more valuable than official authority. Your workplace is the same. The person who sits next to the CEO and catches them in casual conversation, that's proximity. The person who gets included in off-the-record discussions, that's access. The person whose opinion is sought before official meetings, that's influence. None of that appears on an org chart. All of it matters more than your job title. So how do you map the real power structure? You pay attention to patterns instead of titles. Watch who talks to who. Watch who gets consulted. Watch whose emails get responded to immediately versus whose get ignored. Watch which meetings actually result in decisions versus which are just theatre. Watch who gets included in the real conversations versus who gets the sanitized version afterward. This isn't gossip. This is strategic intelligence. You're mapping the actual nervous system of the organization versus the skeleton that everyone can see. Once you understand this map, everything changes. Because now you know where you need to be positioned. Not necessarily at the top of the org chart, at the nodes that actually matter. Here's a practical example. There's always someone in every company who isn't senior but somehow knows everything. They're not executives. They're not in leadership meetings. But they have relationships across departments. They've been around long enough to understand the history. People trust them. That person often has more real influence than people 3 levels above them. Because when someone needs to get something done outside normal channels, they go to that person. When someone needs to understand the real story, they ask that person. When someone needs to navigate company politics, they seek that person's advice. That's real power, informal, undocumented, incredibly valuable. The people who understand this don't just do their job, they position themselves strategically within the real power structure. Not through politics, through genuinely useful relationships and understanding. They build relationships with the executive assistant who controls the CEO's calendar, not to manipulate access. Because that person knows more about company priorities than half the leadership team. They connect with the long-term employees who've seen every initiative come and go. Not for gossip, for pattern recognition. They understand which meetings actually matter and which are just updates. They know which decisions are already made before the official discussion and which are actually open. This knowledge is protective. When changes come, you're not caught off guard. When opportunities emerge, you're positioned to know about them early. When threats appear, you see them coming. Think about the last time your company went through a major change. Layoffs, reorganization, new strategy. Some people were shocked. They had no idea it was coming. Others? They'd seen the signals weeks or months earlier. They'd picked up on the patterns, the closed-door meetings, the shift in priorities, the new names appearing in certain discussions. That's the difference between understanding the org chart and understanding the real power structure. One keeps you in the dark until it's too late. The other gives you time to position yourself strategically. Machiavelli once said, "The wise man does at once what the fool does finally." Map your company's real power structure now, not when you need it, because by then it's too late. Here's what to do practically. Start observing instead of just working. 15 minutes a day, just watch. Who talks to who makes decisions, who gets overruled, who influences outcomes without official authority, who gets their ideas implemented, who gets ignored despite their title. Build a mental map, not to weaponize, to navigate, to understand where you need to build relationships, where you need visibility, where you need to avoid becoming dependent on the wrong people. Because here's the ruthless truth. If your job security depends on people with no real power, you're not actually secure. If your champion is someone who's actually on thin ice themselves, their protection means nothing. You need to understand who has real influence, who has lasting power, who's rising versus who's already at the peak and starting to decline. Because attaching your reputation and security to the right people versus the wrong people is the difference between surviving corporate changes and getting swept away by them. The people who map this structure don't just survive, they thrive. They know which projects will actually get supported. They know which initiatives are doomed. They know where to invest their energy for maximum return. They know who to align with and who to keep at a distance. This isn't manipulation. This is strategic awareness. And in a complex organization, awareness is protection. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I see the real game. But understanding power structures is meaningless if you don't know how to position yourself within them. That's what the fourth law is about, and this one requires you to think differently about your role entirely. Shape law. 4. Become the translator. Here's something that's going to shift how you see your job completely. The most protected people in any company aren't the best individual contributors. They're the people who connect different worlds. Think about your company right now. There's the technical team living in one reality, the business team living in another, leadership thinking in terms of strategy and numbers, frontline people dealing with actual customer problems. Each group speaks a different language, has different priorities, sees different parts of the elephant, and most people stay trapped in their silo. The engineer thinks in code and architecture. The salesperson thinks in relationships and deals. The finance person thinks in forecasts and risk. They're all essential, but they're all isolated. The person who can move between these worlds, speak all these languages, translate technical complexity into business value, translate business strategy into operational reality, that person becomes irreplaceable. Not because they're the best engineer or the best salesperson, because they're the connective tissue that makes the whole organism function. And removing them, that breaks communication patterns that took years to build. Machiavelli once said, "He who wishes to be obeyed must know how to command." But commanding doesn't mean shouting orders. It means understanding what makes different people move, and that requires speaking their language. Here's why translation is so powerful as a protection strategy. Companies can replace specialists. There's always another engineer, another marketer, another analyst, but someone who can bridge departments, who can translate between worlds, who can turn technical jargon into executive insights and strategic vision into actionable plans. That's rare. That's valuable. That's protected. Think about the last time you saw a project fail. Usually it's not because of incompetence, it's because of miscommunication. The technical team built what they thought was needed. The business team needed something else. Leadership thought they were getting a third thing. Nobody fully understood what the others were saying. So the project delivered but didn't solve the problem. The person who can prevent that, who can sit in the technical meeting and understand, then sit in the business meeting and translate, then sit in the leadership meeting and align everyone, that person just saved the company from wasting 6 months and $500,000. You can't fire that person without losing the translation layer, and without that layer, everything gets slower, more confused, more expensive. Here's what becoming a translator actually looks like. It's not about being an expert in everything. It's about understanding enough of each world to connect them. You don't need to be the best engineer, but you need to understand engineering constraints well enough to explain them to non-technical people in terms they care about. You don't need to be a business strategist, but you need to understand business priorities well enough to explain to technical teams why certain features matter more than others. You don't need to be a finance expert, but you need to understand financial thinking well enough to frame your team's work in terms of ROI and risk management. This is a learnable skill. But most people never develop it because they stay comfortable in their specialty. They perfect their craft within their silo. They become the best at what they do. But they never become essential to how the organization functions as a whole. The translator isn't the best specialist. They're the person specialists depend on to make their work understood and valued by other parts of the company. Here's a practical example. Your team just built something technically impressive. To you and your peers, it's obvious why it matters. But to leadership, they're looking at it wondering why they funded this and what business value it provides. Most people would present the technical details, features, architecture, improvements, all the things that matter to specialists, and leadership would sit there confused about why they should care. The translator, they frame it completely differently. This reduces our incident response time from 4 hours to 20 minutes. Based on last year's downtime costs, that's about $800K in avoided losses annually. It also means we can handle the product expansion into Europe without adding headcount, which saves another $300K in hiring. Same work, different language. And suddenly leadership understands why it matters in terms they actually care about. That translator just made their team's work visible and valuable to people who control budgets and headcount decisions. That translator just protected their entire team from future cuts because they demonstrated clear business value. You cannot fire the person who makes valuable work visible to the people who matter. You cannot fire the person who keeps the organization from constantly misunderstanding itself. Machiavelli understood that the most valuable advisors weren't the ones who were best at any one thing. They were the ones who could move between the prince's concerns and the people's concerns and translate between them. Your company needs the same thing. Someone who can move between technical and business, between strategy and operations, between leadership vision and ground-level reality, between what we're doing and why it matters. Most people pick a lane and stay there. That's comfortable. That's safe. That's also replaceable. Because lanes are full of other people who picked the same lane. But the bridges between lanes, those are less crowded, less competitive, more valuable. So how do you become a translator? You start learning the basics of worlds adjacent to yours. If you're technical, you start learning how the business side thinks, what metrics they care about, what language they use, what problems keep them up at night. If you're on the business side, you start understanding enough about technical constraints to have real conversations with technical teams instead of just making requests and getting frustrated when they push back. If you're in operations, you start understanding the strategic thinking that drives leadership decisions so you can connect the dots between strategy and execution. You attend meetings outside your core role, not to participate, to listen, to learn the language, to understand the priorities, to map the gaps between worlds, and then you start bridging those gaps, carefully, subtly. You start translating in small ways, explaining one side to the other, creating understanding where there was confusion. Over time, you become known as the person who can bridge these worlds, and that becomes your protection. Because here's the truth, the organization can survive losing good specialists. It cannot easily survive losing the connective tissue that keeps specialists aligned with business needs and business needs grounded in operational reality. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I connect what others separate, but being a translator only protects you if people actually know you're doing it. Which brings us to the fifth law, and this one's about strategic visibility that most people completely misunderstand. Shape Law 5, Master Strategic Visibility. Listen, this is where most people completely blow their protection. They think visibility is about being loud, about self-promotion, about making sure everyone knows how great they are. So they either go too far and become annoying, or they reject the whole idea and stay invisible. Both approaches fail, because strategic visibility isn't about volume, it's about precision. You need to be visible to the right people in the right contexts for the right reasons. not visible everywhere to everyone about everything. That's just noise. Think about your company right now. There are people who are always talking, always in meetings, always sending updates, always making sure everyone knows what they're doing. And you know what? Half the time, people find them exhausting. Their visibility doesn't translate to protection. It translates to eye-rolling. Then there are people who are invisible, great workers, reliable, competent. But when their name comes up, nobody has a strong reaction. They're not in people's mental map of critical employees. They're in the "yeah, they do good work" category, which means when cuts come, they're vulnerable. The people who are actually protected, they're visible in specific strategic ways that build their reputation without triggering annoyance or skepticism. Machiavelli once said, "It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles." Your visibility has to honor your actual contributions. If your visibility exceeds your value, people see through it. If your value exceeds your visibility, you're vulnerable. The goal is to match them precisely. Make sure the people who matter know what you contribute. Nothing more, nothing less. Here's what strategic visibility actually looks like in practice. It's selective. You're not visible in every meeting. You're visible in the meetings where your insights matter. You're not sending constant updates. You're communicating when there's something worth communicating. You're not inserting yourself into every conversation. You're contributing when you have something valuable to add. This selective presence makes your visibility powerful instead of annoying, because people start to notice a pattern. When you show up, it matters. When you speak, there's substance. When you send something, it's worth reading. That's how you build a reputation for being valuable instead of just being visible. Think about it like this. There's a person in your company who only sends emails when something important happens. You probably read those emails. There's another person who sends constant updates about everything. You probably ignore most of them. Same mechanism, different results. One built strategic visibility. One built noise. Here's another critical piece. Your visibility needs to be at the right altitude. If you're only visible to your immediate team, you're protected from your manager, but vulnerable to broader changes. If you're only visible to leadership, you're protected at the top, but have no support at the ground level. You need multi-level visibility. Your peers need to know your value because they influence peer perception. Your manager needs to know because they control your immediate fate. Leadership needs to know because they make the big decisions. And people in adjacent departments need to know because they shape your reputation across the company. But you can't just spam everyone. That's what most people do wrong. They think visibility means making noise in all directions. It doesn't work. It backfires. Strategic visibility means you understand what each level cares about, and you make yourself visible in those specific contexts. Your peers care about collaboration and competence, so you're visible as someone who helps them succeed, someone who doesn't hoard information, someone who makes their lives easier. That builds horizontal protection. When your name comes up, peers defend you. Your manager cares about making them look good and not creating problems. So you're visible as someone who delivers without drama, someone who makes them confident, someone they can count on. That builds vertical protection. Your manager fights to keep you. Leadership cares about impact and alignment with company goals. So you're visible in contexts where your work connects to strategic priorities, not in ways that feel like you're skipping levels, in ways that demonstrate your work matters to what they care about. Adjacent departments care about collaboration and cross-functional success. So you're visible as someone who understands their constraints, someone who bridges gaps, someone who makes joint projects work, That builds lateral protection. Other departments want to work with you. This is precision visibility. You're not everywhere. You're in the right places, showing the right value to the right people, and that creates a protection field that's hard to penetrate. Here's how this actually protects you. When layoff discussions happen, someone says your name. If you've built strategic visibility correctly, multiple people in that room immediately think, wait, we can't lose them. Not because you're friends, because you've made your value clear to different stakeholders in ways that matter to them. Your manager says, they make my life easier. Leadership says, they're tied to key initiatives. Peers say, they help all of us succeed. Adjacent departments say, we depend on them for cross-functional work. That's protective density. Too many people with too many different reasons to keep you. The invisible person? Someone says their name and the response is, remind me what they do. Or worse, yeah, they're good, but we could probably absorb their work. That's vulnerability. No protective density. Easy to cut. Machiavelli understood that princes needed to be visible to multiple constituencies in different ways. Visible to the military as strong, visible to the people as just, visible to nobility as legitimate. That multi-stakeholder visibility created stability. Your workplace is the same. Single stakeholder visibility is fragile. Multi-stakeholder visibility is robust. But here's the trap people fall into. They try to build visibility through self-promotion. That's not what works. What works is making your contributions visible through impact. Instead of saying, I'm great at solving problems, you solve a visible problem and let people see it. Instead of announcing you're strategic, you contribute strategic insights that people remember. Instead of claiming you're collaborative, you enable other people's success in ways they credit you for. The visibility comes from the impact, not from you announcing the impact. That's the subtlety most people miss. So here's what to do practically. First, map your stakeholders. Who actually influences your job security? Your immediate manager, obviously, but also their manager, key people in leadership, peers whose opinions matter, people in other departments you work with. Second, understand what each stakeholder cares about. Don't guess. Pay attention. What do they talk about? What metrics do they watch? What problems keep them up at night? What does success look like from their perspective? Third, find ways to make your work visible in those contexts. Not artificially, authentically. If your manager cares about hitting quarterly goals, make sure they see how your work contributes to that. If leadership cares about customer retention, connect your work to that when appropriate. If peers care about smoother processes, highlight when you've improved something that helps everyone. This isn't manipulation. This is strategic communication. You're making sure your real contributions are understood by people who need to understand them. And here's the final piece. Strategic visibility requires consistency over time. One great moment doesn't protect you. A pattern of visible contribution does. You're building a reputation that accumulates. Each strategic moment of visibility adds to the narrative. Over months and years, that narrative becomes your armor. The people who never worry about their jobs, they built that armor piece by piece through strategic visibility that made their value undeniable to multiple stakeholders. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I am strategically visible. But visibility without actual capability is just theater. And that brings us to the sixth law, which is about building real skills that compound your protection over time. Shape law. 6. Develop monopolistic skills. Now we're getting into something that takes time but creates permanent protection. Most people develop skills horizontally. They get better at their specific role. They deepen their expertise in their chosen field. They become really good at one thing. And they think that's enough. It's not. Because there are always other people who are also really good at that same thing, maybe even better, maybe willing to work for less, maybe younger and hungrier. Horizontal skill development makes you replaceable within your category. You might be the best JavaScript developer on your team, but there are 10,000 other great JavaScript developers in the market. But what if you were the JavaScript developer who also deeply understands the business model? Who can talk to clients directly? Who understands financial modeling well enough to prioritize features based on ROI? Who can manage projects and mentor junior developers? Now you're not competing with 10,000 people. You're competing with maybe 10, maybe fewer. That's monopolistic skill development. You're building a combination of capabilities that very few people have, not because any individual skill is rare, because the combination is rare. Machiavelli understood that princes who mastered both military strategy and political manipulation were far more secure than princes who only mastered one. The combination created a moat around their power. Your career works the same way. The combination of your skills creates your moat. The wider the moat, the harder you are to replace. Here's what most people miss. The goal isn't to become mediocre at everything. It's to become excellent at your core skill and then strategically competent at adjacent skills that multiply your value and uniqueness. Think about it like this. You're an expert at your core thing. That's table stakes. That keeps you employed day to day. But then you add layers of strategic competence that make you increasingly unique. Maybe you're a great analyst who also learned enough about data visualization that you can communicate findings in ways that actually change decisions. Now you're not just an analyst. You're an analyst who drives action. That's more valuable. That's more protected. Or maybe you're a strong developer who also learned enough about user experience that you can advocate for good design decisions from a technical perspective. Now you're not just a developer. You're a developer who improves product quality, different protection level entirely. Or maybe you're excellent at operations, but you also understand enough about sales that you can design operational processes that actually support revenue growth. Now you're not just operations. You're operations that drives business results. See the pattern? You're taking your core strength and adding strategic layers that make you more valuable to the business and harder to replace in the market. This is different from being a generalist. Generalists know a little about everything. That's not valuable. You want to know a lot about one thing and strategically enough about adjacent things that you can create unique value. Here's the protection mechanism. When your company considers replacing you, they have to find someone with your entire skill combination, not just your core skill, the whole package. And combinations are harder to find than single skills. If they need to replace you with 2 people, that's more expensive, more complicated, more risky. So they don't. You stay. Think about the people in your company who seem completely secure. They're usually not the most specialized people. They're the people with valuable skill combinations, the technical person who can also present to executives, the creative person who also understands project management, the subject matter expert who can also develop talent. These combinations make them sticky. Removing them creates gaps that are hard to fill with one hire. So how do you build monopolistic skills? You start with honest self-assessment. What's your core strength? What are you genuinely excellent at? That's your foundation. Protect it. Maintain it. Keep getting better at it. Then you look at adjacent skills that would multiply your value. Not random skills, strategic ones. Skills that would let you do your core work better or make your core work more valuable to the business. If you're technical, maybe business acumen. If you're creative, maybe analytical thinking. If you're strategic, maybe execution capabilities. If you're detail-oriented, maybe big picture thinking. The key is complementary, not contradictory. You're not abandoning your strength. You're surrounding it with capabilities that make it more powerful and more unique. And here's the important part. You don't need to become an expert at these adjacent skills. You need strategic competence, enough that you can bridge worlds, enough that you can add value, not enough that you're competing with experts in those fields. You're building a T-shaped skill profile, deep in one area, broad enough in related areas to be uniquely valuable. That's the shape that creates protection. Machiavelli once said, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." But in your case, people estimate your value by looking at the capabilities you've assembled in yourself. A deep specialist, valuable but replaceable. A shallow generalist, not particularly valuable. A deep specialist with strategic breadth. That's the combination that creates career security. Think about where you want to be in 5 years, not in terms of title or salary, in terms of capabilities. What combination of skills would make you nearly impossible to replace? What would make you valuable to multiple types of companies, not just your current employer? That's your development map, not what's trendy, not what everyone else is learning. What would make you uniquely valuable based on your specific foundation? And here's the long-term protection this creates. As your career progresses, you're not competing in a crowded market of people with the same resume. You're competing in a much smaller market of people with your specific combination. That's job security, that's salary leverage, that's career optionality, all from strategically building skills that compound into monopolistic value. The people who never worry about employment, they built skill combinations that very few people have, not because they're smarter, because they were more strategic about their development. Start today. What adjacent skill would multiply your current value? What capability would make you harder to replace? What would let you create impact that's currently outside your reach? Then start learning it, not casually, strategically, with the goal of reaching competence, not mastery. Competence is enough when combined with your core expertise. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I build unique value. But even with monopolistic skills, you're vulnerable if you don't understand the final law. And this one's about something most people never think about until it's too late. Shape law. 7. Control your dependency. This is the law that separates people who survive corporate chaos from people who get destroyed by it. Most people are completely dependent on their current job. They need this specific paycheck. They need these specific benefits. They need this specific location. They need everything to stay exactly as it is, and that dependency makes them weak. Because the moment your employer knows you're trapped, you lose all leverage. You can't negotiate. You can't push back. You can't walk away from bad situations. You're a captive resource, and captive resources don't get treated well. Think about the power dynamic in your company right now. There are people your company desperately wants to keep. They get treated well. They get listened to. They get accommodated. Why? Because those people have options. The company knows if things get bad, they'll leave. That creates respect. Then there are people the company knows aren't going anywhere. They're too dependent, too stuck, too scared. Those people get the worst treatment, lowest raises, longest hours, least respect. Why? Because there's no consequence for mistreating them. Harsh but true. Dependency breeds exploitation. Options breed respect. Machiavelli once said, "He who is not prepared for all things cannot defend against anything." If you're completely dependent on your current situation, you cannot defend yourself when that situation turns against you, and corporate situations always eventually turn. Here's what controlling your dependency actually means. It means building enough optionality that losing your current job would be bad but not catastrophic, uncomfortable but not devastating, a setback but not destruction. Most people never do this. They build their lifestyle up to their income level. They take on obligations that require their specific paycheck. They don't save. They don't build emergency funds. They don't maintain external networks. They don't keep their skills current. They don't stay visible in the job market. They make themselves completely dependent, and then they wonder why they feel powerless. The people who never feel trapped, they maintain optionality even when employed. They keep 6 months of expenses saved. They keep their skills sharp. They maintain relationships outside their company. They stay vaguely aware of the job market. They don't burn bridges. They don't let their resume get too stale. Not because they're planning to leave. Because optionality is power. Because the ability to walk away is the ultimate protection. Think about negotiations, salary discussions, project assignments, treatment by management. Everything shifts when they know you could leave. Not that you will, that you could. The possibility alone changes the dynamic. You ask for a raise. If they know you're trapped, they can lowball you. What are you going to do? You need this job, but if they know you have options, they have to consider what you're worth versus what replacing you would cost. Different calculus entirely. You push back on unreasonable demands. If you're dependent, you have to accept them. If you have options, you can set boundaries. I understand that's what you'd like, but that's not sustainable for me. Let's find a different solution. That sentence only works if you're not terrified of being fired. This is why controlling dependency is the ultimate protection. It's not just about surviving job loss. It's about maintaining your power while employed. So how do you actually control dependency? It's not complicated, but it requires discipline most people don't have. First, financial buffer. Save at least 6 months of expenses. 12 is better. This isn't about pessimism, it's about power. When you can survive for 6 months without income, you stop being desperate. Desperation kills negotiating power. Calm confidence creates it. Second, maintain external relationships. Don't let your entire professional network be inside your current company. Stay connected to people at other companies. Stay visible in your industry. Attend events occasionally. Respond to recruiters even when you're not looking. Keep your LinkedIn current, not because you're job hunting, because you're maintaining optionality. Third, keep your skills current. Don't let yourself become so specialized in your company's specific systems that you're unmarketable elsewhere. Keep learning things that transfer. Keep building capabilities that work anywhere. Don't become the expert in your company's proprietary tools unless you're also expert in industry-standard alternatives. Fourth, don't burn bridges. When you leave jobs, leave professionally. When relationships end them cleanly. You never know when someone from your past becomes relevant to your future. The person you thought was irrelevant might end up making hiring decisions at a company you want to join. Keep doors open even when you're walking through a different one. Fifth, understand your market value. Know what people with your skills make elsewhere. Know which companies are hiring. Know what the demand looks like for your capabilities. This isn't about being constantly ready to jump. It's about having accurate information instead of assumptions. When you know your market value, you know if you're being paid fairly. When you know who's hiring, you know your options exist. When you understand demand, you know your leverage. Machiavelli understood that princes who had fallback options could take risks. Princes who had no options became paralyzed. Your career is the same. Options enable action. Dependency forces passivity. Here's what this looks like in practice. You're in a meeting and something unreasonable is being demanded. The dependent person nods and accepts it because they're scared of consequences. The person with options says, "I don't think that's feasible, and here's why." Not aggressively, calmly, because they're not operating from fear. You're being asked to work weekends indefinitely. The dependent person does it and burns out. The person with options says, "I can do this temporarily for the project deadline, but it's not sustainable long term. We need to either extend the timeline or add resources." Again, not a threat, a boundary. But boundaries only work when you're not terrified. You discover you're being underpaid compared to market. The dependent person stays quiet because they need this job. The person with options has a conversation. "I've been reviewing market data for my role, and I'm seeing significant gaps. I'd like to discuss bringing my compensation in line with market rates." Same situations, different power dynamics, all because of dependency versus optionality. And here's the beautiful thing about this. When you're not dependent, you actually become more valuable to your current employer, because they know you're there by choice, not by trap. That makes your contributions more valuable. That makes your commitment more meaningful. That makes you more respectable. Nobody respects the person who has no choice but to stay. Everyone respects the person who could leave but chooses to remain. It's the same person in the same role, but the psychological dynamic is completely different. So look at your situation right now. How dependent are you? If you lost this job tomorrow, would it be catastrophic? If yes, you need to build protection, not by job hunting, by building the buffer and optionality that lets you stop being desperate. The most secure people aren't the ones who could never be fired. They're the ones who would be fine if they were. That confidence shows, that power translates, that protection is real. Drop this affirmation in the comments. I am never trapped. Shape You Now understand the 7 laws that make you impossible to fire, not through politics, not through manipulation, through strategic positioning that makes removing you more painful than keeping you. Let's be honest about what just happened here. You learned things your company never wanted you to know. You saw through systems designed to keep you compliant, dependent, and replaceable. You understand now why certain people are protected while others aren't, and it has nothing to do with fairness or merit. It's about understanding the game underneath the game, the psychological architecture of job security, the real rules versus the stated rules. Most people will watch this video and forget it by tomorrow. They'll go back to thinking that working hard and being nice is enough. They'll continue being vulnerable, surprised when layoffs hit them, confused about why their effort didn't protect them. But you're different. You see it now. You can't unsee it. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? You can go back to how you were operating before. Stay in your lane, do your job, hope for the best, and maybe you'll be fine. Or maybe you'll be the person shocked when things change and you're suddenly vulnerable. Or you can start implementing these laws immediately, today. Not all at once, but start. Start mapping your company's real power structure. Start identifying the infrastructure you could own. Start thinking about your skill combination. Start building your financial buffer. Start controlling your narrative. Start developing translation capabilities. Start managing your strategic visibility. 1 law at a time. 1 week at a time. 1 month at a time. Because here's the truth that Machiavelli understood completely. Security doesn't come from hoping the world will be fair. It comes from understanding how power actually works and positioning yourself accordingly. The people who built careers that survive every change, they didn't wait for someone to teach them this. They figured it out through pattern recognition, through observation, through getting burned and learning. You just got the compressed version. Years of lessons in one video. The question is whether you'll use it. Think about where you want to be 5 years from now. Do you want to still be worried about your job security? Still vulnerable to every corporate shift? Still feeling like you have no control? Or do you want to be the person who never worries? Who knows they're protected? Who has built such strategic positioning that removing them would cause more pain than keeping them? That's the choice. And it starts with your next action. Maybe it's mapping the power structure in your next meeting. Maybe it's reaching out to someone in a different department to build a bridge. Maybe it's identifying the infrastructure you could own. Maybe it's updating your emergency fund. Maybe it's having a conversation with your manager about a strategic project that would increase your visibility to leadership. Whatever it is, do one thing this week that implements one of these laws. Then next week do another thing, then another. Because these laws compound. Each one makes you slightly more protected. Together over time they make you nearly impossible to dislodge. And here's what happens when you become impossible to fire. You stop living in fear. You start operating from power. You make decisions based on what's right, not what's safe. You set boundaries. You take risks. You speak truth. You build things. Because you're not constantly worried about protecting your job. You've already protected it. Now you can focus on actually building something meaningful. That's what real security enables. Not just keeping your job. Doing your best work because you're not paralyzed by fear. The people at the top of your company, they understand these laws instinctively. That's partly why they're at the top. They position themselves strategically. They built irreplaceability. They controlled their narratives. They mapped power structures. They developed unique skill combinations. They maintained optionality. You can do the same thing, not by being manipulative or political, by being strategic and aware. Machiavelli wrote that fortune favors the bold, but only when boldness is combined with wisdom. These laws are the wisdom. Your implementation is the boldness. So I'll ask you one final time. Are you going to go back to hoping your good work protects you? Or are you going to start building real protection through strategic positioning? If you made it this far, you're already different from most people. Most people can't handle uncomfortable truths about how their workplace actually operates. They prefer the comfortable illusion that merit and effort are enough. You know better now. You've seen behind the curtain. You understand the actual mechanisms of job security. The only question is what you're going to do about it. If this video changed how you see your career, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to understand these laws, and subscribe for more content that cuts through corporate bullshit and tells you how the game actually works. Before you go, drop this final affirmation in the comments. I control my security. Remember, you don't need to be the best at your job to be impossible to fire. You need to be strategically positioned so that removing you costs more than keeping you. That's the game.